we did a study over the last year where we interviewed public libraries across actually the United States. And we wanted to see how much librarians knew about Creative Commons, and in particular CC0. And in part, this started out because Dustin and we had a class together, and we were talking about Creative Commons in that class, in the context of open educational resources, actually. And it turns out, of the librarians that were in the room, only 2 out of about 15 knew what Creative Commons was. And so at that point, we realized, wow, there may be something to this. And we wanted to see if that's actually a trend across the United States. We did actually attempt to get some funding and did not. Therefore, the research was actually done via an online survey. We realized that comes with limitations. It was not our ideal choice. However, it was what we could financially do to get the study started. We are now talking about, or planning on doing additional studies. We'll focus on Utah. We'll do the same type of study, except for this time we're going to do person-on-person interviews. So we're actually going to ramp up the method of research, although the area is actually going to be smaller. All right, that said, as noted, I'm Ann, and that is Dustin right there. So the way in which we actually operated this is actually the questions. So we asked them a series of about 10 questions relating to public domain. I'm going to walk you through those. And then after they answered, they would actually get a description of a formal description of what each one was. So as they proceeded on to the questions, if they did not know what CC Creative Commons was, we ended up telling them so that they'd be able to answer the future questions. The survey then was done in an online format. I'm not going to walk through the whole thing, but I'll give you an example. So this is the type of survey that they got. All right, so that said, I'm assuming most people in the room know what Creative Commons is, and hopefully CC0 on top of that. So I'm not going to spend a bunch of time trying to go into that particular description. I will say, however, that then what we wanted to do is we wanted to study the awareness, the complexity, and the effects of CC0 in particular on libraries. And so we went to library directors or managers across the US, only in public libraries. Our next one's going to be academic and other libraries as well. Right now we focus specifically on public libraries, and we did the qualitative actually, survey to see what they had to say. This was administered via, first we sent an email inquiry, which then pointed them to the online form. We also did send out reminders to make sure that if they hadn't, we don't know who filled it out or not, but to encourage participation. So basically where we're at, we have about 9,000 public libraries across the United States of America. Therefore, we sent out 750 random emails. So we found 750 random libraries with email addresses and contacted them. Of those email addresses that we were able to obtain, 35 of them were rejected flat out, so we didn't have a valid email address. That left 715 that actually got submitted. We got 16% response rate, which I know was sort of low, but it is what it is. And so we got 113 responses. However, of our 14 questions, 59 of those people did not go all the way to the end. And in our eyes, we said we can't consider that to be valid data if they did not actually complete the survey. Some of you may have different opinions. That's the way that we handled it. That left 54 that actually completed the entire survey, and that is the numbers that I'm going to be talking about. We did base our studies actually trying to figure out the diffusion of innovation. So how well has Creative Commons diffused to libraries, and CC0 in particular? So our foundation, our theoretical framework for that was Everett Rogers' Diffusion of Innovations, which I'm assuming a chunk of you in the room know of, Everett. And so in his context, the ones that we wanted to focus on is his definition of diffusion. Basically says it's an innovation, which CC0 is, communicated through certain channels, over time, and among members of the social system. So after we asked them what they knew of these different things from public domain on down, we then said, what role do you think the innovation itself played? What role do you think communication played? And moved our way down. So first of all, we started out by saying, hey, librarians, what do you think the public domain is? And now this area, actually, we did get a good number of answers. I'm just going to pop through my research here quick. 750 manual, we're going to get to the right page. All right. There we go. Okay. All librarians actually responded to this question and knew at least to some extent the definition of public domain. Only 32% were able to accurately define Creative Commons and 11% when we get to CC0, but when it came to public domain, they got it. All librarians, public librarians, were pretty aware of what it was. We tried to break down kind of what they said their definitions were. If we went with Merriam-Webster's definition of public domain, it would be the realm of embracing property rights that belong to the community at large, unprotected by copyright or patent, and subject to appropriation by anyone. So that said, when we asked librarians, their most common response dealt with not being protected by copyright. So that was 47% of our responses that we got. The second most common theme focused on being free for all or free to the people. But those people didn't actually mention copyright. They just said it's free to people. More of those types of answers. So the material available for public use said things like, quote unquote, information belonging to the people, or free for all patrons to use at will, or rights which are owned by the people. Okay, so they kept those two things somewhat separated. So then the not protected by copyright group, they said things like free from copyright on use, items not protected by copyright, belonging to or available to public without copyright, and published works that were not protected by copyright, which are two slightly different angles of the same thing, right? We had about 9% say that it was expired copyright, so anything in public domain had to be expired, which isn't quite accurate, but expired or not been renewed, anything in which copyright has lapsed or was created so long ago in which it does not apply. We had another category that it said expired or not protected. And this is getting closer to, this is probably the most accurate description of the group. All right, so these guys said, they noted that while expiration of copyright matters, there are other means in which items can end up in the public domain and thus be unprotected by copyright. So we followed that and said, okay, how about Creative Commons? What do you guys know about Creative Commons? And right off the gun, we had 60% that said they don't know what Creative Commons is, of public librarians across the US. That was surprising to us. Of the people who did know, 32% gave some semblance of an accurate description, and 8% gave descriptions that weren't accurate. And so I'll give you some examples of some of those. Accurate descriptions. A place to intentionally share ideas and information with at least a partial forfeiture of individual intellectual rights. Or Creative Commons offers text, music, images that are free of copyright restrictions. Okay, we're good. Some of my incorrect examples. Things that are created by a group and others can use and change as needed. Or a second one. It is an organization that works with copyright licenses. So we're kind of missing it on some of those. So he said, all right, well now remember after each one of these we give the formal definition. So for Creative Commons, we actually cut and pasted Creative Commons' own definition and plastered it on the screen, whether they read it or not. That leads them to the next question, because these are a sequence of questions. Librarian definitions of CC0. CC0 putting stuff into the public domain. At this point, we had 75% of people flat out say they do not know, and moved on to the next question. Of people who did know, or thought they'd know, we had about 11.5% that were accurate or sort of accurate. We had another 7% that actually described Creative Commons, not CC0. And then we had 6% that were just not accurate at all. So let's give some examples of some of those. Some ones that were accurate or partly accurate. CC0 is for people who want to completely give up copyright to material they have created. All right. The creator of a work has waived his or her intellectual property rights and declared the work to be in the public domain. Good. Incorrect answer has things like taking someone's work and making changes. The end. Or a copyright that protects databases for commercial use in the public. Not close. All right, so we're like, all right, well this is equally fascinating. happening here. So then we said, all right, well, can you see that the ability of an originator to place items into the public domain, could you see that affecting our social and cultural perceptions of copyright and or intellectual property? And now in these questions, actually, the social and cultural perceptions was capitalized, so they can't miss what the topic is. And in that, we had about half of the librarians said, yeah, we can see, if somebody could put stuff in the public domain, we can see that having social or cultural impact. So those who said they could see it having an impact, yes-leaning answers, they said things like, I imagine it would build an expectation in society for even more property to move into the public domain and to move there quickly. Good. We had some people that were more yes and no. I'm not exactly sure. Good, bad, kind of a little bit of both. They said things like, most were inclined to believe that placing items in the public domain legitimizes what is already happening. Right? We rip off stuff all the time. So now I can just do it legally, knowingly or not. It was actually brought up as well. Others thought that it wouldn't change social and cultural perspectives at all. So in this area, the most common idea is that things are either in the public domain or they're not. And it does not really matter how they got there. A perspective I personally found fascinating. All right. So then we said, okay, well, how about legal perceptions? Can you see the ability of an originator to put items in the public domain affecting our legal perceptions or practices of copyright and intellectual property? Here we had 45% say, yeah, I could see that happening, and you guys can kind of see some of the numbers here. So I'll just go over some of the answers that we got here. In our yes answers, one surprise to me is they said, yes, but we think it's going to have an impact, but it's actually going to complicate our legal perception and situation because we'll be less sure which is in which category. So they said things like, would the item remain in the public domain, or could a subsequent owner make it a copyrighted item? Or, I think that we'd have to do a great deal more research to be sure of the status of a document or a work in question. Huh, interesting. All right, those who emphasize no said it would still be legally considered in the public domain or copyrighted, regardless of what licenses are applied through the innovations. 7 individuals simply said it will have no legal impact at all. So then we said, okay, how about citation and attribution? Can the ability to put something in the public domain as an originator, is that going to impact what we do with citation and attribution? Now, I came from English. I used to teach English sometimes, and I don't know about you guys, anybody teaching English. It's like, I'm pretty sure it has an impact. But anyway, when we asked the librarians, here's where they came out. Only about 31% said, yeah, we think it's going to have an impact on citation. Okay, and this is the ability to put stuff in the public domain. All right, so much of the yes respondents focused on works not being cited because they've been remixed, altered, or generally edited from a public work. And then they said things like, it seems obvious that content can be altered, copied, remixed, or edited, and that may lead to confusion when it's cited or attributed to the person who created the original work. Okay, like, I might not know who the originator was, for example. Okay? Or odds are that the originator will not be credited every time that the citation is used, and therefore it will become anonymous piece in fairly short order, making proper citation or attribution nearly impossible. No responses reminded us that many of the works are already in the public domain and are often correctly cited if the author or vital information is known. So they're saying, well, stuff in the public domain has been in the public domain, we've cited properly. One of the answers here, I don't think public domain has anything to do with citing or attributing of work. Either a person is conscientious about this, or they're not. So he said, okay, well, how about this? How about the impact on libraries? So if we put more stuff in the public domain, does it impact you, public library librarians? And 81% of them said, yes. Yes, as a matter of fact, it does. We don't know how, but we know it's going to impact us. All right, and so here, this is one area we got a lot of agreement on. Okay, and they seem to agree that the more methods that we have for moving works to get them into the public domain, that's the better off libraries, public libraries in particular, are going to be. And this has something to do with funding, access to resources, right? The whole idea of a public library is public resources. So some of the answers we got here. Yes, it would make freely available more development. So then we said, okay, well, is this generally a good or bad thing, right? So the idea of being able to put something in the public domain, is this good or bad? Very positive response here. So 75% said, oh yeah, it's a good thing. We like that you can put stuff in the public domain. And so here, let's see, we got answers. Overall, the respondents believe that the more public domain resources we have, it will positively affect creativity and innovation by giving creators of works and users of works more options. 6 responses, for example, emphasize that it would give free access to items to more people and puts the distribution and sharing of work into the purview of the creator. Okay, so we're now, as a creator, I can make my own personal choices. We then focused on the diffusion of innovations. These answers got a bit more abstract, so I'm going to sort of shoot through these kind of quick. Role of innovation itself, role of communication, role of time, social systems. Here, basically, the role of the social system had a broad array of answers. They basically said that we have a broader audience, is really what it comes down to in that category. Distribution of information is increased and disseminated. Dissemination and awareness of resources that are available, and a greater exchange of ideas. So they said, well, what about time? And time, they said, this makes it fast. Okay, so if I want to get information out, it's a greatly accelerated speed to be able to do it over the internet. Communication channels. They wisely pointed out that the internet has an impact, a direct pipeline to the public through online resources. It's also a more effective channel of communication online, and affects how and when items are placed in a location that's findable. The role of the innovation itself, so the actual inception of CC0, they said that's not as important, which is interesting to me. So they said it's less relevant, because the innovation itself, it does open channels of thought and gives exposure to new ideas, but it's the concept around it that is having the greater impact. So with that, I'm going to actually turn over to Dustin, who can speak. I'm an academic. He can speak as a librarian to say, what does this actually mean to librarians?
Anyone with a library background? Good, good. You might disagree or agree with me, but more than anything, I joined this field about 5 years ago and just finishing up my actual Master's of Library Science, but I've never could imagine a profession that's more concerned about their legitimacy. They talk about it constantly, talk about their validity, and it comes from this background of being treated like a paraprofession and being characterized as women's work, which would have been negative at some point, but I think it's a very positive thing at this point. But they're always concerned about it, and what I see here is if you're trying to say that you are an information professional, which library schools more or less at this point are called library, they've either shifted to completely to being information science or library and information science. So they're saying they're in this profession of information science. And what you see is this is an epic failure. On all sides possibly, but more than anything, for a profession that believes they're an information profession to be unaware of an innovation that is, this broadly known is, as I said, I think I say woefully in there somewhere, but it is just an epic failure. Just at the most basic level, when somebody comes up to you as a librarian and asks you for help, do you know how to simply switch Google so that it's searching for images that are free to share and use? Like, down to that most basic level. But then as you move upwards, there's so much opportunity loss in a library. As far as, they're constantly talking about ways to reach their communities. They're constantly trying to build programming. MIT OpenCourseWare has been around and available for a very long time in a very open format. And one of the things, can't you imagine a library just saying oh, you guys get together, do a course here at the library, and that's a great way for the library to serve its community. So in general, it was shocking to me. And this is really definitely a preliminary study. We're doing a secondary one, and one of the things we really want to do is get a lot more demographic information so that we know how long people have been out of school, how long they've been in libraries, to really kind of course why this innovation isn't being diffused or disseminated the way it has. A lot of this fault has to come back to thought leaders, as it always should. is the American Library Association failing in its diffusion and its role of diffusing this innovation in particular, but many other technological ones? Are the individual? It comes down to individuals a lot, but is the Utah Library Association failing? Is all these other state library associations like? Why isn't this better known? Because this is a huge opportunity for libraries to take a part in it. On the other hand, if you are involved in an organization, say you're in K through 12 online school in Salt Lake County, in Denver, wherever you are, if you are not involving your public library, you are failing as well. Because these people are looking constantly for legitimacy and validity. They want to partner with just about anyone to provide services for their community. So say you run an online school in the Denver area, go to your public library, set up a program where students can meet each other once a month at the public library. Whatever you want, whatever you can think of, libraries are going to be involved in this type of programming. They're more than happy to, but clearly they're, you know, it's not just the innovation. With what we've seen, you know, with our preliminary results, is they're kind of missing the conversation completely. Like, is this going to have an effect on society, on culture, and things like that? And not saying yes, to me, is mind-boggling to some extent. To be ambivalent on that idea, but like, you know, they kind of get on board when you come back to this idea. Well, is this good for libraries? It's like, yeah, like free stuff is always good for libraries. Resources are always good for libraries. So at some level, there's a disconnect. And, you know, with this innovation in particular, but this is not the only one, and it's very frustrating, and it needs to, you know, if we're going to be concerned about our legitimacy as a profession, it needs to be taken care of at the professional level, at, you know, the professional organizational level. Because other than that, you can't blame Creative Commons because librarians don't know about CC0. You know, you can ask Creative Commons, you know, Cable was talking about doing webinars for libraries, and that's a great idea. But at the heart of it, like, librarians have to, if they want to be considered informational professionals, if they want to be respected, they have to make sure that they're involved in all of these movements and all of these ideas and at the tables to help set agendas and to help disseminate ideas. Because libraries are great organizations and they have great goals and great missions, and they do fight a lot of fights that other people aren't fighting. Like, we're constantly fighting publishers and people like this that are just like locking down ebooks and locking down other resources and databases. But I keep coming back to this idea that the fact that this innovation is so poorly understood is surprising and shocking to me, and it needs to be rectified. But more than anything, the pipeline needs to be rectified so that innovations like these are not missed at the professional level. Any questions?
It's not so much a question as a comment. I'm Rob Farrow at the Open University, and I work on the OER Research Hub project. We've just done, as part of Open Access Week, a global librarian survey. And we'd be quite happy to share that with you and see if that gives you any insights into your own context. What might be the same, and happy to try and integrate what you're doing into what we're doing as well. So maybe we can have a conversation about that afterwards.
Most definitely.
I would like to replicate this in Kentucky because I'm fighting the same battle with our public and academic about Creative Commons and just that understanding.
Well, in this first one, this is a national one, and we're going to narrow down because we're going to do person-to-person interviews going forward for this next part of our research where we're trying to get a lot more information. And our time is up. You can come ask us questions during the 5-minute break.